So yeah, Jughead, thank you for doing this. And I would like to start kind of with the recent happenings of your artistic life.
Yeah.
The audiobook is something that was cool and unexpected and also led to some new music. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah. The book itself went out of print, but I started working with this guy, Tyson Cornell, who runs Rare Bird Lit. He put out Chris Barrow's really beautiful photograph book of punks. So he put me in contact with him. And then I sent him like a ton of my ideas. And he said, well, I like working with people as an artist, like more than just book to book. I want to actually have artists that are part of the company. So I'm hoping, hopefully that will become true. But so the idea was that we would nurture all these different projects. And it's been going really well. The first one was, well, let's do something easy for them to release, because there's not a lot of work to do on the audiobook for them. They have to like do all the finessing of the files, but most of the job is me. So I just sat down here for almost a year in my little basement here. And while I was doing other interviews, I would take time out afterwards to record another chapter.
Wow.
It was really exciting. And it was interesting reviewing my book after this many years, which is a book about reviewing your life, years later.
Yeah.
So it was interesting reviewing what I was reviewing back then. And there was difficulties I didn't even think about, like the fact that I have like 40 different voices
Hmm.
in the book. So I had to decide how I do that. And I basically come up that they're all me, just with slightly different accents and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it was great. It was great to do. And they love it. Um, but Tyson got the idea. He goes, well, why don't you come out to LA? He wanted me for a different reason. I guess what they do is one of the unique things that Rare Bird Lit does is that they release vinyl records of audiobook selections of an audiobook, and actually have people come into the studio and do like an underscore for it. They
Wow.
had the guy like from Anthrax come in and do one of his, and the guy from Ricky and Nikki Six came
Hmm.
in and did
Yep.
his too. Um, so he's like, well, why don't you just come out and play? And then him and I were like, well, what? As long as you do that, why don't we just like record a semi-famous 7-inch? Semi-famous is what I call
Yep.
Screeching Weasel. And we were both like, that's great. And that idea became more exciting to me. The other stuff is really cool. Like the underscoring stuff is cool. But I got my friend Billy Brown, who he was a great musician. He was in this hardcore band called Crash and Burn, and
Mm.
Asher's with the guy from Unseen, I think
Yeah.
he was. And then I had my other friend, one of my friends, and Ryan Rockwell actually write Weasel-esque type songs. And we went in, we had such a great time doing it that we've now decided to do a full length retrospective. It's going to be like the Kill the Musicians, basically, going from the whole period of That's in Weasels in a Box. So basically from the beginning of Screeching Weasel to Bark Like a Dog, we'll be doing like a grouping of songs that represent all of those time periods.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, so Ryan Rockwell's actually going to fly out when I get back in December. So we'll all be in the same room with Tyson on drums and Billy on guitar, and we're all going to switch off bass and stuff like that. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's really exciting. And I'm going to have Omar, who did the original artwork for Kill the Musicians. So I'll have his artwork for this.
Oh, that's a cool painting for that album for sure.
Yeah. There's
Mhm.
another one he has of Uncle Sam like bearing his ass, which I might actually use for the cover of it. So
Nice. Uh, that's very exciting. Yeah, I have to commend you
yeah,
for committing to that project. It sounds like it, took a lot of persistence in terms of, making it happen and doing the recordings and as you say, coming into some challenges that were unexpected. And that book in general is a very unique book. The point of view is very unique, and the storytelling is unique. And in some cases, it's kind of dreamlike. And that's
yeah.
that's the book that when I read that book before you and I met, and that's what kind of got me intrigued by you as a person, and also Cody, because you mentioned him a lot in the book.
I do.
He's from Wyoming, so it means something to me personally that you're doing more with this book, because it's one that I think kind of laid the groundwork for me wanting to reach out and contact both of you guys.
Oh, cool. Yeah. It was a lot of, I mean, it really was a lot of fun to do. And it put me in a weird mind space, but I was already in because of the pandemic and other things that happened. I was already in a kind of a strange
Yeah.
mindset. But the talking to myself is, so here am I doing an audiobook of me talking to myself. So there's like 3 levels of me.
Yeah. Well, it's
And
cool.
I think it comes out. I think it's actually a really good book that's kind of meant for audio. I didn't think about that when I wrote it because I wanted to write something that was not a tour diary, not a movie. I wanted it to be, a novel. I'm
Yeah.
a purist in that way in some ways.
Yeah.
Uh, but when I did read it, I was like, oh, this actually works really well for audio.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Well, that's a very nice segue into my next line of questioning, which is
great.
about your podcast. And what's remarkable to me about it is not only has it progressed and developed a lot since you started, but you naturally have a very good voice for podcasting and a great personality for interviewing. And I don't know if this is like an unexpected thing. I know your theater background probably gave you somewhat of an advantage, but it seemed like such a natural transition, and it's really, I mean, in my view, it's very successful and very enjoyable for me as a listener. So you've had some great guests lately, and it seems like there's been a lot of momentum with the podcast. So what can you tell us about that?
There's many different aspects of it that I could talk about. Hopefully, there might be some questions within this question,
Sure.
because I'll answer that. I've always been inquisitive, and I always enjoy talking to people. Like I, I'm fascinated with teachers, and like you're a teacher too. So I always strike up really great conversation with teachers, and I think what people sense is an actual interest in what they're saying. Like I don't really distinguish between someone being a plumber or a teacher or a musician or a famous actor.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't seem to distinguish between those. It's just something that someone decided to do, and hopefully they want to be doing it. That's what I usually try to find out, is if someone wants to be doing something.
Sure.
Um, and that's acquainted with my later year frustration of the way I acted in Weasel and the way that the position that was kind of put on me, but also I gave into, which was like the second fiddle,
Mhm.
not the one that spoke. But I knew that my instinct was always to talk and question people. So I felt bad that I met all these people that became famous or just became friends over years, but I never really engaged in conversation with them.
Mm.
So part of the podcast was for me to make up for that, a lot of that lost time, I thought,
Wow.
yeah.
That's interesting. The guests that you've had, like the series of the past dozen or so guests, have all been ones that I personally was very excited about, and they're also people who I would want to meet and talk to, and so it was really satisfying to hear, some of the unexpected ones too, like Fred Armisen and
Yeah.
uh,
John Ross Bowie
yeah,
or
Jughead, and that's who I was trying to think of, and of course Cody and people who I know personally. And the Kepi one was great. That's the one I listened to most recently.
oh, thank you.
Um, Well, it's interesting too because I know for in some of these cases it's the first time that you're talking to some of these people, and
Yeah.
you can sense there's mutual respect and mutual sort of acknowledgement because they know your work and you know their work, and you're coming together and through conversation, and there's something special to that, I think.
Hmm.
So what else was I going to say about it? Mainly that I just think it's awesome, and I hope that you're getting enough contributions to keep it going. And
Yeah, I mean, I work on the Patreon. It's like they say with acting, when you get the job, that's like 10% of the actual job of acting. 90% is auditioning.
mhm,
With the podcast, it's a lot of work, but a lot of the work is in keeping a Patreon going and trying to raise funds to actually keep me in a position where I can commit to it.
well,
So
you've done
it's an ongoing piece of work.
well, I've noticed you're doing some things like sponsorships and kind of reaching out to people in our little scene and
Yeah.
allowing them to contribute in their own ways, and that's
Yeah.
cool. I think that's great. So yeah, um, kind of segueing into that, our scene and your participation in like the current scene. I think all of us were pretty like surprised, but pleasantly so, that you would start a new punk rock band. And the Mitochondriacs have been a very cool, unique chapter of your musical life. And also what's very interesting to me is who you ended up working with, you know, because I've known Marky and Eddie for a while, and I've known Maria before she was married to Marky and everything. And I mean, it makes sense because you're in the same general area, but I wouldn't have seen that coming, nor would I have seen it coming that you would create something that's a lot more traditionally punk rock than, like, say, even in Blackouts, like aesthetically. And so how's that experience been, and what's next for the Mitochondriacs?
I don't know. I think it's a little bit more of a band than the Mopes, but it's still less of a band than even a Blackouts or Screeching Weasel. And sometimes that's the magic of it. So I don't know where it's headed. There's a lot about what it is. I mean, a lot of it was Eddie and Marky were always involved with the basement shows here. Like, Marky always lent me equipment.
That's
And
cool.
Eddie was always like the guy driving around and buying the pizzas. He's like Italian to the core. He always has to make sure you're fed. And I honestly, Marky is Marky, and Marky will always be what Marky is. The one that really surprised me was my relationship with Eddie became pretty deep, pretty quick. Like
Nice.
an actually good friend. Kind of got me out of my ruts when I was here away from Nanaco and stuck in the pandemic. And he just offered up coming in and playing in Marky's studio, you know, just play around. And the initial instinct was just to write a song quick, record it that night, and then move on. But also part of it was I was dealing with a lot of anger in myself towards other people, but also towards myself. And I thought that was a fun thing to play with, because I don't usually play with anger or hatred or ridicule. It's just not a comfortable space for me. But I'll let you in a little key to the Mitochondriacs is mostly when I'm talking about someone else, I'm half talking about myself.
Interesting.
Like when I'm yelling at somebody, I'm yelling at myself. And that's, you got some people are like, oh, this is all about Ben, isn't it? I go, well, some of it is, but it's really about my anger myself.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Like looking inwards and being upset with yourself or frustrated.
Yeah, it struck me not as something that would necessarily be directed at specific people, but just like an exploration of yourself and those emotions, including dark emotions and extreme emotions.
Which
interplay between emotions and kind of the ridiculousness of it all, which I think.
I always wanted to bring humor into it, and that's always the ending goal. And a lot of that comes out in the studio, because I just love being in the studio. And the way Marky's studio is, it's just a room and you're all standing and sitting in there. There's no division between like the microphone booth or the drums. So it's kind of fun just goofing around, screaming and yelling. And I think it comes out pretty fun. And like I said, what I've been saying about the band too is that I've never, even in Weasel, never really allowed myself to have complete fun with that format. Even on Blackouts, to me, was like purely artistic pursuit of trying to understand who I am, who are these people in the band, what kind of meaning can I drag out of this, how can I do something unique and different for myself. Whereas Mitochondriacs, I just threw a lot of that out of the window and just said, I'm gonna rip myself off because I deserve it.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Well, it's a very unique chapter, I think. And I want to acknowledge, for Marky and Eddie, I've worked with those guys on projects. They're always really great to work with. And I've had lots of, very positive, friendly interactions with them. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a time in the pop punk scene when they were kind of personas non grata, and they were the favorite targets of a lot of the.
That was part of my, the background is, part of it was that for me, like knowing I was feeling bad about myself and feeling worthy of ridicule. That's like what disappointed is about. Once again, it's talking about myself. I'm just completely disappointed in myself. And I was disappointed in them and how they handled it. Especially Marky, because he's unapologetic, and I think he was wrong in some ways, and he's not what they painted him to be. But instead of fighting against what the perception was, they gave into it. And I've had long conversations, mostly with Eddie than with Marky, about that. And it's to me, it's more of it's the dichotomy of Marky and his upbringing And there's a lot more to it that I don't feel comfortable talking
Right,
about.
right.
A
Yeah,
lot of justification in his real situation that if people knew, they'd back off a little bit.
yeah,
But it's not something you're going to say about yourself, because you dig yourself a deeper hole if you try to
sure.
say, I'm not, I don't, I love black people. It's just not.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Eddie, I'm sorry, I want to get this last point because it's important, is that I think Eddie was one of the sufferers of the brunt of that. He's
mhm,
one of the kindest people I know to everybody. He was asked not to be on the drummer of what's his name, who I played with too in Costa Rica, Gabriel. He was
mhm,
supposed to play drums for him, and they said, well, you can't play here if you're going to have Eddie on drums.
mhm,
And the irony to me is like, okay, Eddie gleefully agreed to play drums on a South American Mexican, like,
yeah, yeah,
like guy, without even thinking about it. And this guy saying no to him is doing it because he's calling Eddie a racist.
mhm,
And it's like, it was ridiculous. And
right.
and his wife is amazing, Kelsey, and she
Mhm,
works in really, she does a lot of donating of her time to helping out youths in very bad situations. So
yeah,
it's a big disaster machine. And they helped it. They,
yeah.
unwillingly helped it get ugly.
So yeah, I mean, my perspective on that is I kind of watched all that unfold as a fly on the wall, from the message board point of view, and I was like, man, that sucks for everybody involved, really.
Yeah, yeah,
Just when negativity keeps being recycled in conversation, it kind of brings everybody down, I think,
yeah,
morally.
yeah,
What I know about Eddie is that he's extremely knowledgeable and dedicated to this style of music, and he really loves it. And he's always
yeah,
been really enthusiastic and supportive of me. And when I reached out to do an album with them, part of my thinking too was like, I want to show people that these guys are cool to work with, and I
yeah,
want our results to show it, and I want it to just be like a non-issue anymore. It's like, oh yeah, okay, they played on that album, and life goes on. And I actually had a couple of people from like that core pop punk message board scene like say to me like they were interested that I chose to work with them, and like interested that I was willing to sort of give everybody a chance, I guess. But
yeah.
you know, from my experience, those guys are solid. And Maria, I met her in Chicago,
Oh yeah, Maria is great. Yeah,
and
yeah.
she's just always been cool and very talented. And I think I know maybe it's not even worth bringing up the past, but I just felt like that was part of the mitochondriacs story as well. So
Yeah, no, I wish I could talk about it more in depth and privacy, but I can't do it without permissions and stuff. But it was a bad situation. I felt like me too. Like I said, I was in a frame of mind where I was critical of myself, and I was like, well, maybe this interaction could help all of us. Like,
yeah,
and to me, even if you to say someone is racist, the answer isn't to leave that person to dig themselves deeper. It's to try to be an influence on them, like try
yeah.
to. And I realized I didn't really have to do that. I mean,
Mhm.
but I was willing to go, okay, well, maybe I'll influence them in a more positive way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've tried to uh, evolve to become is a person who's forgiving and who allows people to make mistakes and learn from them and change. And that's part of life. And,
Yeah.
I think hopefully the internet culture has evolved to a point where people are more aware of that, because for a while there, it was getting very blamey and shamey and, a lot of kind of witch hunts that were going on in different
Yeah.
aspects of culture. And that was very unfortunate
Yeah.
consequence of that like evolution of social media, because it it just brings out kind of some of the uglier qualities of human nature. It doesn't have to be that way, and when you're face to face with somebody, it's a totally different.
Yeah. And I don't know, even if I would go so far as it doesn't have to be that way, but if you look through history, any kind of idealistic movement, whether you support it or not, there's going to be bad actors.
Yeah,
I mean, even I'm not a huge fan of Ayn Rand, but when I read The Fountainhead, I was like, wow, someone could take the idea of democracy and turn it on its head by
Mhm.
using its own rules,
Mhm.
by maneuvering people and being dishonest to them.
Mhm.
So basically, in any kind of movement ideal, it's possible because people are flawed.
Yeah, for sure. And even something as kind of silly and harmless as the pop punk scene is just as vulnerable to human
Yeah.
nature as any.
Well, I mean, I think you're undercutting it by saying it's silly. And I mean, I think one of the things punk has set itself up as, and like I've talked about this about it, talked about ethos. Like,
Yeah.
what other does metal talk about an ethos? Or I mean, I don't know. Do most of these they might have one, but do
Yeah.
they talk about it as much as punk does? It's set itself up to be self-destructive in many ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. Man, I think that's actually a thing that distinguishes it from a lot of metal, because a lot of metal kind of is a little bit more escapist in their
Yeah.
scope, and
Yeah.
it's more about an aesthetic or more about some more entertaining aspects. Or I mean, some people are really serious about certain imagery or beliefs, but it's different than punk in that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so well, anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say about it. But I'm stoked that you're continuing to do mitochondriacs
Yeah.
work and
I
that.
guess the thing I'll throw out there, but since most of it was cheap and they were doing it for fun, I was using it as an opportunity to also to feed. Like my own life, I'm often very poor, so I
Mhm.
was like, if the money never actually gets to my hands, I can donate it. So like
Yeah.
each release would have its different donation, and we're still going to do that. Now we got to try to get Marcus some money for studio time, so we're going to like do 50-50 sort of splits with donating.
Mhm.
Yeah, like on these two new tracks, donating it to Alzheimer's. So 50% will go to like paying back studio time, 50% will go to
Mhm.
charities.
Well, that's cool, and I think it's cool for those guys too, because despite all the trials and tribulations they've been through, I mean, now they're in a band with someone who's, you know, like Weasel is one of all of our favorite bands, and so
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're in a band with you, like that's it speaks for itself. You know what I mean? It's like they've reached the level where like, okay, well, like we're friends with Jughead, we're in his band, and like, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't, yeah, I don't, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it'll do for them or against them. You know, they're aging punks too, and they're
Sure.
not as interested as going out. Eddie just had a new kid.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different ball game. It's not
Yeah.
like no one's shooting for any kind of fame, even on the punk level of fame. We're not
Right.
really.
I don't think that really exists anymore so much.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm starting to get a bit detached from the scene and lose some interest, but it is definitely different than it was
Yeah.
in terms of what your ambitions could be or should be.
Hmm.
But at least there are people that are still interested enough in forming a community around it. And I still think there's good music that comes out of it too. It's just, you know, like anything, you kind of have to look around and know what's good and seek it out.
Yeah. I'm hoping to eventually go more into the direction of, I mean, I need to get more popular, and I know it's a weird thing to say, but the more popularity does feed, since I'm an independent person, it
Mhm.
allows me to feed different avenues that I want to feed. Like I would love to get people that have a little bit more fame to bring in more people.
Yeah.
And then I'd also like to reach out to newer bands, but I can't really do it now because I'm depending on building an audience. And often if it's just about all new bands and I don't know enough about it, it's just going to go down in viewership.
Well, I've
But I,
seen that. I've
but I
seen that
hoped,
happen.
yeah,
You
I
know?
hope to be able to support the scene more in like a fresh scene eventually.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. But I mean, you're a great historian and you're a great resource for the people that like the guests you've chosen. I think are all very relevant and very meaningful in terms of like
Yeah.
what people would want to hear and the stories they'd want to hear. So,
Well, yeah, I wouldn't take that away from him. I'm just talking about my own ambitions is
oh
to
yeah,
be able
yeah,
to be a little bit more current in some ways.
sure. Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of am aware of who the good bands are now and stuff like that, but it's not as obvious as it used to be. It
Mm,
seems, you know
mm,
what I
mm.
mean. And
Yeah.
there are some great labels that are making an effort. Like the label Mom's Basement is having a festival in
Mm,
October
yeah.
with a lot of the good bands. And
Right. That's John Prophet, right? Is that his
yes,
name?
John
Yeah.
Prophet Jr. and Eccentric Pop Records is a great label. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, the one that I work with a lot is Out Loud Records, which does a lot of kind of supporting the DIY and the smaller bands. And so there's lots of opportunities. And then of course there's like all the scenes in Europe and Japan and all over South America and stuff. So it's still,
Yeah, my hope is to like I'm going to Japan and I might be there. I'm there for 3 months, but I might business wise be able to extend it a year. And if I do, I'm going to dig into the language because there's so many punk Japanese bands that I want to interview. And
Mhm.
I'd like to be able to interview them half in Japanese, then also be able to translate it in the moment. So I got a lot of work to do with my language skills before I can do that.
So,
Ah,
so do I, of course.
yes.
Yeah,
But
I was I
that
was
is the
gonna
goal.
I've been studying for a little over a year, and that's my next question is all about Japan and Nanako and your
Cool. Go
next
for it.
chapter. So I turned 40 when the pandemic was happening, and I realized like there's not that much more time for me to learn Japanese. I better go for it. And it's something I've always wanted to do, and I've always been really fascinated with Japanese culture and everything that I just like, you know, tastes wise are things that are celebrated in Japan and things that flourish over there. So um, you've learned quite a bit about Japan. You've traveled there and lived there, and your partner is Japanese. And what's the connection that you feel to Japan and the Japanese culture and yeah, and maybe if you don't mind sharing a little bit about Nanako and how that relationship
Yeah. Once
started,
again,
I'd like to hear about
if there's sub questions, that would be great but I'll just go on.
it.
I am not one of those people that was a Japanophile. A lot of my friends that I've made in Japan, a lot of them being from Australia because they're in the same time zone, even though they're
Yeah.
just as far away,
Hmm.
uh, have gone there like to get Japanese women or just because they're obsessed with anime or
Yeah.
manga. I didn't have any of that. I just went purely for the job
Hmm.
and then was blown away with how much it seemed to match my way of being,
Hmm.
which is, I have anxiety, but I sort of have a calm uh, persona around about myself. I
I
always
agree.
have.
Hmm.
Um, so it seemed natural to be there. It seemed really to feed into that. Whereas, but also another element I've noticed why a lot of these Japanophiles, and a lot of them are geeks,
Yeah.
outright geeks, why they feel comfortable there is because Japan is very good at alienating you. I mean, they've been doing it for hundreds of years,
Hmm. Hmm.
I wouldn't call them racist, but it's definitely, they have alienation techniques that are astounding.
Yeah.
So what you would think that might be a negative thing for these people, but what I think it does for a lot of these guys that I know that live there now is it highlights the fact that they felt different at home, but now it's justified in a way because like I am different. I'm not Japanese. It's kind of like makes you feel more comfortable in your own skin, knowing that you are an outcast,
Yeah. I understand
instead of
that.
being in America and being an outcast, but not wanting to be, you kind of are. It's like it becomes so apparent. But I
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of that. I did feel like I've always felt like I'm weird and on the outskirts of things, but my love was mostly the hiking, the 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 aesthetics of the action being more important than the object itself. A lot of the philosophy around that idea,
Hmm.
the awareness of the other, which is much more apparent there than
Oh
our
yeah,
ego driven society here.
for sure.
It felt very natural for me to be a part of that.
Wow, it's cool.
Yeah.
And so Nanako came along in your life, and now I know you spent a lot of time apart, which
Yeah.
must have been agonizing. And now you're going to be reunited, which is cool. And I mean, she just seems to have a very beautiful aura to her, and I've never met her, but the pictures and photos speak to that. And
Yeah. People really warm up to her very nicely. She's probably yeah. She worked for me as an assistant in Universal Studios, and everyone loved her. Like she was so natural
mhm.
and great. And now she works with kids, like she works on playgrounds and watches kids. She's a concert pianist, but
Oh, wow.
since our lives are going back and forth so much, neither of us can commit to a job, so we're just kind of taking whatever comes up.
Mhm, mhm.
But I mean, every day she comes home and she says, they were all over me. I said, well, there's 3 or 4 teachers there and they're all over you. That's because they just all love you.
Yeah. Wow.
So
So
she
she's
kind of
working
got
with
that. She's kind of
young
got that where
children.
where a kid just will look at her and like they'll just like gravitate towards
Yeah.
her. And
Yeah. Well, that's a
um,
gift.
yeah, it is. And yeah, I love her dearly, and I'm really lucky to have met her.
Yeah. I hope I get to, meet her
Yeah.
and spend some time with both of you in person.
Yeah.
Some,
And the other thing too that I think is interesting is she's really given into even if it's just for ourselves for the most part, she's really given into our relationship and being an art project, which I kind of talked about recently on
yeah.
Facebook. And I'm trying to explore that idea more because it sounds kind of strange to say it, and I want to get to the depths of it, but I'm just started now thinking about what it means. But she's been really into that, like especially since we're apart a lot, we're
Mhm.
constantly doing art projects, building each other things, making movies for each other,
Yeah.
anything to create that intimacy that we've lost because of you can't actually touch the person,
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool, man. I really,
Yeah, yeah.
I
So
respect that effort on many levels, and you'll have something to show for it, which I
yeah,
think.
we already have like 20 books of like photos and drawings, and it's
But that's
crazy.
something that you and I think have in common is just a desire to create and have these artifacts that we can
Yeah.
look back on and reflect on and say, well, this is a chapter of my life, and yeah, there's a lot that I could say about this. And whether it's music or books or art, visual art, I think it's very worthwhile to spend your time
Yeah.
creating
Part
things.
of it's funny we say that because, and I'll reach back a little bit into the podcast because one of the reasons for the podcast, I I talk about it being more of a reason than it actually was, but it is a reason that I got, I don't know, tired or was not very good at being an object person. Like, people hang things on their walls and they have all their records. My things were getting lost in the basement and flooded. And so I just made a mental transition into trying to store that stuff in thoughts and conversation instead of objects as much.
yeah.
But when it comes to art, yeah, I do like the product.
hmm
But part of my artistic pursuits with the podcast have been to make that more abstract.
hmm hmm
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and we were just discussing, I think, art and artifacts and creating and archiving our lives through creative um, projects that we make, and that was a something I can definitely relate to.
Mhm.
And
Well,
I
one of the things I'm sorry, I'll add there if we are going to close off that part of the conversation, I think about, and I often have this argument with my director friend who worked with me for years and years. Like well, and part of it is just fun ridicule, but he'll make fun of me of talking about myself a lot.
yeah.
And what I try to tell, because he wants me to go back to writing plays because he was my director. So he's always
hmm
trying to nudge me to like get away from this self-exploration.
hmm
But to me, one of the things I think is amazing about art is, and it could be too much about the self and too absorbed in the self.
yeah.
But to me, one of the cliche sayings is to, the closer you go to yourself, the more you get to like a universal
hmm
truth. So, and I really do try to pursue that, and sometimes feel guilty that my my uh my understanding of, or what is it? What am I saying? My skill
hmm
is myself, which
hmm
which sounds a little circular sometimes, but from there, I'm hoping it gets to bigger issues like in
Sure,
the
sure.
world
Well,
and
what
people
I
can
think
relate
that
to.
speaks to is your ability to reflect, and I think through reflecting on yourself and your experiences and how you're evolving as a person, that's going to get you closer to some kind of universality. Some
Yeah,
greater
yeah.
truth.
And I think the like every interview I do, I'm always a little bit nervous, and luckily my improv background has given me a little skill and a little bit of confidence to go in those. But it is about, like I said, I have a endless interest in the other person, but it also is building, trying to figure out who I am, and then using this person to bounce those things off of.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think about those things too, because I think part of being an artist requires some kind of ego and some kind of confidence,
Hmm.
but that can be uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
Like my whole thing has been pretty much a one person project. And so it is a lot about me. And I've struggled with that at times. But I think just the impulse to create is still like a pure thing that we shouldn't question, and we should just still go for it and just try to be as authentic as we can. That's my view, at least.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lesson I learned when I started writing plays and I even wrote a play about it called Road in the River, which is basically about the imagination meeting reality. There is a point as a creative person or someone who decides to intentionally take them seriously as an artist, that you do have to start reflecting on that self and what you actually are giving to others. Like
Mm-hmm.
there has to be an awareness eventually. You can get away for a pretty long time on completely no awareness of yourself or the other and just create. But
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, you have to start looking at the self. And often, like I don't want to go off on these deeds, but I think, there's this in musical, there's this conflict in a band of like, oh my God, we're famous doing this style, but we're getting better. So we're changing, but they want this and we want the change, or do we say the same? Do we change over time?
Sure.
And so sometimes that self-evaluation can destroy you, but
Yeah.
also there's no growth without it too. So
Right.
it's very risky business, but
Oh, sure. Well, one thing that you said in an interview, I think something I remembered is something about how sometimes the best art that you create is like the least appreciated. And I think that even in Blackout's project, it is a very deep, meaningful, artistic project. And I think it kind of flies over people's heads if they're just looking for more Weasel, And
yeah.
the thing about Weasel style and that, I mean, just the pop punk sort of canon, it's reliably satisfying in the same way that like a comfort food would be, but you can eat that to the point where it's does nothing for you, and you kind of have to like expand your palate. And I think that's, when you talk about taking risks and things, it's something that I think about too. And I also think about how many times is it okay to kind of create something that's so similar to what you've already done in the past? Like, does it need to be 25 Green Beats albums? Like, maybe not. If I have a lot more to say, then yes. But if it's just going to be like repetitive and not challenging, I think it's not really worthwhile to continue. So that like, retirement from a project and moving and transitioning, it's a tricky business, I think.
And like I often say, I call it, I find myself singing a lot on the podcast, creativity is a wily beast.
Mm-hmm.
And I do mean that. It's like you try to put a name on it and then it finds it redesigns itself or configures what it means to be an artist or a creative person.
Sure.
So I don't think there's any one answer on how to continue. Someone can live their whole life just doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. And how things are looked at over time and how that view changes is always very fascinating to me. How things could not, like, maybe people don't care while it's happening, but 10, 20 years later, it's suddenly like this amazing thing that like everyone's discovering. It's just weird how that works.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also a perception, like I've even done, like mitochondriacs, one of the things I had to give into is, and it's still, I think, unique to me, or the band is unique to the people in it, but I had to give into like, I'm just going to do what everyone kind of else is doing. And it's about the now.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about art and two different perceptions you can have of the legacy, and let's call that literature.
Sure.
And then just the in the moment, you can call it like pulp fiction, like
Sure.
those are the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think an artist sometimes is often balancing between those two. And I was very much with even in Blackouts, the couple of I wouldn't call them negative, but the faults of the band was, I think I had myself too much in the eye of the legacy and it being literature, and maybe wasn't as interesting or exciting to a punk in those times.
Sure.
I wasn't concentrating enough on live. I would concentrate on the now because I'm a performer, so that's it.
Sure.
But in the creation of it, it very much was with my feet in the future, and that might have turned off a lot of people. I'm not sure.
Well,
I'm still perplexed by how unwell we did.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of a heavy burden to carry around, this the legacy that you're a part of, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You don't only want to be known for one thing. You want to be
Yeah.
versatile and be able
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't regret that at all. Not even in my darkest days of like, why didn't we make it big? Or,
Oh, right,
I
right.
do not regret that decision. Um, what was I gonna say? That's fine. We'll go on.
Okay.
I lost it.
That's
Lost my
okay.
train
That's
of thought.
okay. Well, my next notes might take a turn for the sillier sort of
Okay.
side of our conversation, because I wanted to bring up some past stories, and I wanted to see what you recall about our first time meeting in person, because there's kind of a funny story behind that, and I don't know if you remember it this way, but if you don't mind, I'll tell it and then see what
Oh yeah, go
your
ahead. Yeah.
response is. So um, we met in San Francisco,
Yes.
and you were there, and I think I came straight from work and met you at a park, and
Mhm.
getting there was tricky because of afternoon traffic and everything, and so the layout of this park was such that I was on one side and you were on the complete opposite side, and I wasn't sure if you were there or where I should park and things like that, and I was starting to get stressed out over it, and like didn't want you to think that I was late, or I didn't want you to be bummed out. So what I ended up doing is parking on the complete opposite side of the park from where you were, which was like, a long city block and a
Yeah.
big crowded park with people with dogs and kids and stuff.
Mhm.
And you were still nowhere in sight. So I thought, okay, well, I found this parking spot. That's the best I can do for now. So I might as well just, run, and like started physically running through the park to get to Jughead. And as I'm running through the park, like, it's kind of alarming. Like, what's this guy doing running by? And then
Yeah.
somebody's dog starts chasing me. And the dog is like in excited mode chasing me, but like in heavy pursuit, like instincts have taken over and it can't control itself. And I just remember the owner like trying to direct me and saying, "You must stop running. You must stop running. Stop running. If you stop running, the dog will not chase you. Please stop." And I couldn't. I was like, "I can't. I'm late. I need to go." The dog kept tearing through the park. And then eventually, I don't know, I guess it, lost interest. And then I finally turned the corner, and there you were, and you were looking off. It was kind of an elevated
Yeah. Yeah. I
in the
remember
city. It
that.
had a kind of a nice view, and you were just reflecting and just kind of chilling out and zoning out. And then I came up and introduced myself. And but there was I don't think you had any idea of like the craziness that happened like moments leading up to our meeting.
No, no. I remember meeting in the park, but I have a lot of good memories on that. I remember you took me to that other hill that
Mhm.
overlooked the city,
Oh yeah.
and that's when you started talking about your love of Enemy You and David,
Hmm.
and we sort of bonded on having known that fella.
Yeah.
And then we went for burritos, I think, too.
Yep, yep. In Mission, we got a rare, like, perfect parking spot right in front of the
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, that was a good time, man. That was really
Hmm.
special for me. And before you were saying that you don't have the ability to distinguish between people of different whatever statuses, and you're just kind of interested in the person. And that came across immediately when I met you. And I just remember being struck by that because I've met other people who I admired or who have some level of celebrity, and everybody handles that differently. But I think,
Hmm.
to your credit, you're a very authentic guy and easy to be friends with.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So there's that one. That kind of leads me, kind of getting towards the end of where my notes are. So if nothing else comes up, you know, we can wrap it. But the next topic I have is next chapters of life, and I know for you
Mhm.
it's going to involve Japan, and I'm just curious about that, and what that will involve, and what your hopes are for the next 3 months and perhaps the next year.
My hopes are that I haven't lost the inspiration to work on a novel again. Novels are difficult,
Mm,
and I have a really, really, I think, great one, probably the best thing I've ever written, brewing, and I've got a lot of it, but I don't know if I have that stamina to finish it, but I'm going to find out. That's one of the things I'm going to work on. And now that I actually have an excited publisher behind me, I think that'll push it further. So And that's, I mean, when I was little, it's the only, you know how kids kind of have the, I want to be a astronaut or I want to be a doctor or something. My house was so chaotic that it was, I want to make it till tomorrow. That was kind of like my,
Yeah.
but the one thing I've always thought I had was eventually I'd like to be old and write books. Like that's kind of was one of my only ever dreams. And
Nice.
I still would like to work towards that. So some of this goal is to, if I can possibly can, be a little less external and a little bit more private and intimate
Yeah.
with my own life. So that's kind of the plan.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, I respect that a lot, and I think about that too. You know, I don't really have a desire to be a public figure as much as maybe I used to be in terms of like, being an artist and constantly trying to make sure that people care. It's a big part of the job, and you know, I don't know, but I can definitely relate to wanting to have more of a sort of tranquil, peaceful,
Yeah.
simple sort of life where there's still some creativity and still some projects that are happening.
Yeah, what I'm sensing that's going on, and I hear it in my interviews with some of these people that of what punks particularly are trying to figure out, punks that never wanted that limelight and it was thrust upon us. And
Hmm.
if we got it, great. Like some
Yeah,
of us even like Dr. Frank or a couple tried to get it.
yeah.
Uh, But it's really interesting talking to like a Kepi or a Vapid and
Hmm.
me and all these people of this age range now where we don't regret anything we've done. We didn't want the fame. We hurt for cash,
Hmm.
but we're still artists and still want to create. And it's kind of really interesting to seeing how we're all dealing with that. And I don't
Yeah,
have an answer yet, but a lot of it is going private and some of it is maybe going more, Kepi loves committing to the road and
yeah,
being with people.
yeah.
I would love to be like that, but I seem to be a little bit more wrapped in up into a one-on-one intimacy that I'm working on and seeing where
Sure.
that leads. But it's really interesting to see all these people that from punk dealing with what to do with that energy we have and that
Hmm.
sort of integrity that gets shit on a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think it is fascinating, and you never know. I mean, Cody, he's still touring a lot, and there's plenty of people who are still very active, and I know it's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
important to a lot of people, and that's why they can
yeah,
still have these big festivals and still set up these national tours and stuff. So I celebrate it, and there's younger people that are getting into it through their their parents,
yeah.
or through just
Well, I just talked to Kevin Aper, who did the Apers for God knows how long, and all of a sudden he starts a metal hardcore band, and then he's like selling out arenas and
they've
shit.
done amazing. I mean, they played Wacken Festival. That's huge.
Yeah,
That is
it's
huge.
it's
In the metal world, that's like Woodstock, basically.
yeah,
You know? I love that he did that. I think he's a fascinating guy. I hope I get to meet him sometime. We kind of correspond just through
yeah. He's very
electronic
fascinating.
stuff. But oh, and yeah, you interviewed him. I need to listen to that one. That's a recent one, right?
Yeah. I just released that one. Yeah,
Very cool. Very cool. Well, John, I really appreciate your time, and this is it's always really great to talk to you. And I like
Oh,
that we've
thank
been
you.
able to stay in touch and you know keep tabs on each other through the years. And yeah, I wish you the best to do your next chapter. And I've been studying every day for over maybe almost 2 years trying to develop my Japanese and my reading, my writing, my speaking, and it is a goal to go there, and maybe we can all be together and
Yeah.
speaking
Well, maybe, I
Japanese
mean, if
together.
you want, you and I can start doing joint lessons if you want, like maybe like a half hour a week or something. You and I just try to talk.
That might be cool because
That might be, yeah. I'm looking for something like that. So that might
okay,
be
well
good.
that's good timing for me because I was doing a tutor with a program called iTalki, and I have a great tutor. She's a university student from Kyoto, but she's studying right now, so it's a hiatus for me with the tutor. It does help to
Yeah.
have speaking practice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it does. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, well we'll stay in touch about that. Just have
Yeah.
to count.
Well, we're gonna, you and I, we're now friends. I mean,
Yeah.
we were before, but
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I will probably be hitting you up for contributing another song for the semi.
Sure. Yeah, I've
But
always got something, that one I gave you, like I'm glad you used that because that was a just I don't know where that song came from. Just a lot of times when
yeah,
I write music now, it's when my son's in the shower. It's kind of the only time I can pick up the guitar and just play and not be bothered with
yeah,
anybody because it's understood that I'm helping him, and then my wife's like doing something else. So that atmosphere is really good for coming up with tunes. But
Yeah.
sometimes they're just like aimless tunes. I think that was just kind of an aimless tune, and I just found some.
Yeah, it has that nice aimless feel in it, and it's good. It's still being worked on, but I had Nanako. I don't know if you heard the version where Nanako has piano on it now too,
Oh,
but
okay.
that whole middle section is now a piano part.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah. So we're still working on that one, but
Great. Well,
yeah,
that's an honor to be part of that. And Ryan's a really talented guy. Ryan Rockwell.
yeah,
Yeah,
he is.
he's
Yeah,
an
it's one of my life jobs is to get him still creating because he's his worst own enemy in many ways. So
yeah, that's the thing about us creative types.
yes,
Complicated emotions that can either benefit or ruin
yeah,
our whole deal, you know?
yeah, yeah. He's pretty amazing at it. Like just watching him come up with something,
Oh yeah.
and it's pretty great to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.